Well, I enjoyed teaching as part of this series last week, and I'm looking forward to doing that again tonight, and hopefully what we'll talk about tonight will be a help to you. I've thought about, and preparing for this week, I've tried to think about our audience. You know, one of the things you learn when you first start taking a class in public speaking is one of the first things they teach you is you need to make sure you know your audience, know who you're talking to. And it's interesting when you think about what we're going to talk about tonight from the book Mastering Life. It's principle number 5, and we're going to talk about resting in the Lord tonight. And the idea of taking intentional opportunities to rest and relax and rejuvenate. And I thought about this crowd, and many in this crowd have already become masters of that. I mean, you guys are masters. Some of you could write a book on how to rest. And no, I'm just kidding. But we do have different people in this group that some are younger and have families. Some are maybe retired. Some are maybe not retired, but their kids are out of the house. Some have young kids, and so some are working, and they're in the peak of their working years, and so they're very, very busy from that. And so everybody's going to look at this lesson probably a little bit differently tonight, but I think there'll be something that everybody can glean from, and I think we'll be able to learn a little bit about what the Scripture says about rest. I think about what Psalm 127 verse 2 says. It says, "It is vain for you to rise up early," talking about before the day begins. "It's vain for you to sit up late," talking about when the sun goes down. And it says to eat the bread of sorrows. Other versions of that, like the ESV, they translate that to say something more along the lines of to live with constant anxiety. There's no purpose in you waking up early and staying up late and constantly staying busy just for the purpose of living with this anxiety that you always have something to do. And then it tells us a promise about the Lord, for so he giveth his beloved sleep. And a consistent teaching throughout Scripture that's established at creation when God sanctioned the Sabbath is this idea that you and I are supposed to have times and periods where we take time to rest. And when I say rest, I don't mean necessarily sleep, although that is a part of resting, but rejuvenation and relaxation. And by rest, I really mean the normal rhythms of getting away from your schedule to rest and rejuvenate. And the Bible certainly mandates that. The Bible says a lot about it. For instance, Jesus said in Mark chapter 6, verse 31, "And he said unto them, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place." Now in Mark chapter 6, they had just fed the 5,000. This is at the peak of Jesus' earthly ministry. It was very, very busy. The disciples were going to and fro and everywhere, and it was getting a little chaotic. And so Jesus tells them, he says, go apart into a desert or an away place, and he said, and then rest. Take time to rest for a while. And then he says, for there were many coming and going, or they're talking about this busyness, and they had no leisure so much as to eat. Or we would say they were so busy they didn't even take time to eat. And so Jesus says, no, you got to get away. You got to take time to rest. Take time to eat. Take time to rejuvenate. Don't allow yourself to get overly busy. We all that are here tonight, have limited reservoirs of energy, and we all require frequent periods of rest. And some people in our society and in our culture tend to feel guilty when they sit down, or tend to feel guilty when they check out, or tend to feel guilty when they rest. I remember a meal that I had. This would have been in 2012. I sat down, it was at a Chinese restaurant, because I love Chinese, in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And I was working at a church as an assistant pastor, and I was with the pastor of that church. We had another person on staff that was there, and we had another pastor from a church in the community that was there, and we were all eating Chinese food. Well, at this time in my ministry as an assistant pastor, the pace of that particular ministry, to be honest, looking back, it was just insane. Because everybody that was on staff, there was not any day off. You had no day off. You never had a day off. You worked every single day. And we had a bus ministry at the church, a large bus ministry. And so on Saturdays, Saturday was really viewed as your day off, but you had to be at the church at 7:30 in the morning. It really wasn't off. And so I'd show up at 7:30 in the morning. I would lead a bus, a meeting for these bus workers. I would take groups out, and we would go visit people and try to build our bus routes. And we would be out till 1 or 2 o'clock. And so really from 2 o'clock on Saturday was kind of your time off. But Sundays were so busy, you typically spent a lot of that time preparing for Sunday. Because on Sundays, we would show up, and at 8 a.m., now our church would not go for this. But at 8 a.m., we had what we called a B Sunday school, which stood for Bus Sunday School. So I would teach a Sunday school class to all the bus workers because they had to leave and go out to pick up kids. So at 8 a.m., I'd teach a Sunday school class. And then from there, I would go get on a bus, and I'd ride a bus and go pick up kids. I'd get back from the bus, I'd teach a teen Sunday school class. And then after the teen Sunday school class, I'd go to children's church and teach in children's church. And after children's church, I'd get back on the bus, and I'd take all the kids home. And then by the time I got back to the church, it was time for choir. I had to be in the choir too. I mean, why not? And then after choir, I preached in teen church on Sunday night, all on Sunday. And I tell you that because I just really want you to feel bad for me. No, that's not why I tell you that. I tell you that because sitting at this Chinese restaurant, this has flashed into my mind so many times. I sit there with all three of these other pastoral guys, and we were talking, and I was talking to the other pastor, not the one that I was working with, but the other pastor, and I said, man, sometimes I just need to be able to check out mentally. And I said that to him. I said, sometimes I just need to be able to check out mentally. And he looked at me as serious as he could, and he says, I don't know where you think in the Bible it gives you the right to check out. And I thought, I wasn't trying to be offensive, and he says, we have work to do for the Lord. Everybody works a job and they come to church. We shouldn't take off, we shouldn't take time off and all this kind of stuff. And I say that because since that time, all three of those people that I sat around that table with are all out of the ministry. All of them, all three of them. None of them are in the ministry anymore. One of them had an affair and ended up leaving his wife. One of them got out of the ministry because of discouragement, depression. Another one moved to Utah, had an affair, and none of them are in ministry anymore. And I think part of the reason, it's more complex than that, but part of the reason is that you and I were designed to have normal rhythms and periods of rest and relaxation and rhythms of rejuvenation. And even the Lord told the disciples that in Mark chapter 6, verse 31. So I want to review of what we talked about, and then we'll get into your handout that you have. So far, we've talked about several different things, and this is why I'll tell you this, you'll understand at the end. We've talked about finding God's will for your life, going about the Father's business, how to redeem the time. We talked about being self-disciplined and organized and decluttering your life. Last week we talked about maximizing the morning. And when I read that list in preparation for this lesson, I thought, well, that really sounds like Confessions from a Workaholic. If you read that list by itself, so this doesn't really lead in very well to how to have rest in the Lord. But I think you'll see tonight, by the end of the teaching, that God never has expected us to live in a chaotic state of never-ending exhaustion. God's just never expected that from us. And so in your handout, there are three principles I'm going to give you. You'll follow along, and I'll give you some notes to go along with that. The principle number one when it comes to resting in the Lord is that you and I got to be careful that we avoid the trap. We avoid the trap of busyness. We avoid the trap of busyness. If you're not careful, you'll get into a trap of being busy. And how many of you know you can be busy and really be doing nothing all at the same time? Now, you can be busy and really be accomplishing nothing all at the same time. So a lot of you know, a lot of you are in an e-group and you're doing that. And so a lot of you know how the e-groups work and kind of what happens inside of there. Well, we decided at the end of the year that we felt it would be good, and we thought we would give it a try, to open up these e-groups to teenagers. We didn't really know how that would go because teenagers are a little bit different because some of them rely on a ride. They don't have their own transportations. Teenagers sometimes they're not super disciplined. But we thought, well, let's try it. And to be honest, it's gone very well. We have 2 middle school groups, 2 high school groups. But I lead a middle school boys group. Now, Carson's in here. Carson's in my group. And I'm going to tell an illustration, and I just want Carson to know this is not him. He's here. This is not, so everybody, this is not Carson I'm talking about, all right? He was out of town this week. This happened this week, and he was out of town, so he gets a pass on this one. But in our group this week, so I lead, it's 6th, 7th, 8th, and I think I have one 9th grade boy that's in this group that I lead. And they're all learning, they're all kind of learning. They're reading the Bible, they're kind of figuring this out, and they've all done very, very good, and I've been very proud of them. But there's one boy in the group who's really struggled to do his reading. And so you know, a lot of you know how this works. You come in, you'll have a day, you've read Genesis 28, and I'll say, hey, what did you get when you read Genesis 28? And they'll say, well, this stood out to me. And I'll say, well, how would you apply that to your life? What would that be saying to you today? And they'll give an answer. Well, this particular boy he in the group, he said, every week he says, I just wasn't able to do some of the reading. And I've tried to be gracious about that, and be kind. And because that's just the kind of guy that I am. You know that. No, but this week, we were sitting in there and I went around and I asked him, I said, hey, what did you get from this particular day? And he said, well, I didn't get to that day. I said, well, okay, all right, well, that's fine. We'll come back to you. And so we go to another day, and I get to that day, and I go to him again. I said, well, what did you get on this day? And he says, well, I didn't get this day. He said, to be honest with you, I didn't get any days. And I said, well, so kind, gracious Pastor Noah here. I said, well, what's going on? What's happening that you're not able to do the reading? It doesn't take super long. And all the other boys had done it, and I said, everybody's done it. He said, well, just to be honest, I'm just too busy. Now, mind you, this is an 8th grader. Okay, this is an 8th grader. He said, I'm just too busy. And I said, so at that point I decided we really need to dig a little deeper into this, because I said, well, why are you so busy? And he says, well, I play baseball. I said, well, okay. And so I asked a question I should never ask because it led to me being very aggravated. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Don't you think some of these other boys are busy too? Some of these boys play sports. They got families. They're doing all these other things. I said, don't you think they're busy? He said, yeah, but they're not as busy as I am. I said, well, what time do you get home? He said, I don't even get home till like 4:30. I'm like, my head's starting to hurt at this point. And then I have another adult in the group. So there's me and one other adult that lead these guys. And I said, well, do you think you're busier than me and him? He said, I'm definitely busier than y'all. And so his memorial service is this Friday at 7 o'clock. And so y'all pray for his family. And so anyways, we kind of laughed about it later, and I gave him a hard time about it. But I tell you that illustration to say that sometimes what we assume as being busy really isn't busy. But there is a trap to be avoided when it comes to busyness. And you've heard this said before, that if the devil can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. The devil may not, there's certain things the devil may never get you to be able to do. There's certain lines you're never going to cross. But when it comes to saying yes to everything, when it comes to overloading your life in a way that God kind of get squeezed out of your life, the devil, if he can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. Busyness has a tendency to make us think that we're more important than we are, or that we're automatically accomplishing more than others simply because we're busy. You know people like this. They come around and they have to remind you of how early they woke up that day, and they have to remind you that I didn't get home till 9 o'clock last night, or 10 o'clock, or I've been going. You just don't understand how busy I am. And it gives this kind of like faux mentality that they're more important, or they think they're more important than what they are. They're certainly more important than you are because they're busy, but that's just not true. Busyness causes us to commit our lives to a list of activities that in our own mind, they're just overvalued. Activities that in the end really don't matter, but we've committed to this list of activities and it's caused us to be busy, and that busyness, if you're not careful, can become a trap. Many people today that are in churches are not necessarily bad people. But I would say there are a lot of people in churches, especially inside of my generation, that are just way too busy. They're just way too busy. They don't have time for the things that really matter. They don't have time for the eternal, simply because I think that they're too busy. If you notice this, that only one letter separates the words busyness or business and busyness. Almost very much the same. We would sometimes maybe even use these words interchangeably. We learned early on as we were talking through this series, Brother Bob taught a great lesson on this, that Jesus was about his Father's business, but it never said anything about being about his Father's busyness. He was about the business of his Father, but not the busyness. Jesus' earthly ministry. Think about this with me, and I'll say more about this when we'll close. But Jesus' earthly ministry was only 3 years long. He only had 3 years of earthly ministry. But inside that earthly ministry, he really never seemed hurried. I love the lesson about redeeming the time that we had, because when you think about our generation and where we live today versus all generations before us, we pay so much attention to the time. And Jesus never did that. Jesus, you just never say, well, I'd love to stay, but I got to be here. He was always just doing what God had called him to do where he was. He was often, by the way, tired. He would take regular periods of rest. We're going to read about those. I thought about this. There was one time that Jesus fell asleep on a ship during a storm. I mean, he took his naps pretty serious. I mean, he took his rest pretty serious. And so Jesus, I think, simply understood how to restore his strength and renew his stamina, and he took that seriously. And I think you and I got to be careful to take that serious and avoid the trap of busyness. And I'll give you a couple of guardrails to do that. Guardrail number one would be this: we must be busy doing the right things. You got to be busy doing the right things. You got to find out what are the right things that I need to be doing, and then be busy about those things. Many people are very, very, very busy, but they're busy doing all the wrong things. Think about your time right now and the way that you spend it. All of us are different, and all of us are at different ages and stages. But we probably, if we were really to dig down, we'd probably have to admit a lot of us waste a lot of time doing things that we would say keep us busy, but in reality, they're just overvalued activities. They're just overvalued activities. And so we want to find the things that really matter and be doing those things and be busy doing the right things. American writer Mary O'Connor wrote this: "It's not how busy you are, but why you are busy." It's not how busy you are, but why you are busy. And then she says, the bee is praised, but the mosquito is swatted. Both are very busy, but one is productive and one is a nuisance. And so we want to make sure that we're busy doing the correct things, find the right things, and then do those things with the busyness. That's guardrail number one. Guardrail number two is we got to guard, and I'm going to be honest, and again, I'll say more about this in the last principle, but we got to guard against being too busy. My tendency, and this lesson's hard for me to teach, because my tendency is to say yes to everything. My tendency, if someone says, I need you to do this, my tendency is to say, I'm going to do it. And I at times I don't set up any guardrails to keep myself from overcommitting myself more than I can ever accomplish. And I think some of you probably are like that too. We kind of have a can-do spirit in America. We want to accomplish something, and we want to be part of a solution. But you have to guard against being too busy. Everybody's heard the phrase, burning the candle at both ends. This old Proverbs is often misunderstood, though. It refers not to burning both ends of the candle like is referred to in the picture. That's not what the proverb is talking about. It's actually talking about burning both ends of the day. It's where you wake up early and you have to light a candle until the sun comes up, and then the sun goes down and you have to light a candle to continue your work into the night. It's the idea, because when that phrase came about, there was no electricity. I mean, people started working when the sun came up, and they stopped working when the sun went down, and they kind of had a rhythm of rest and rejuvenation. When the sun went down, they just began to rest. They just began to rejuvenate for the next day. Well, we live in a different society. We live in a society where you can go to Dunkin' Donuts and get a coffee and a donut at 3 a.m. I mean, we live in a society where people work third shift and they work swing shift, and you can go, it's changed a little bit since COVID, but I mean, you could go to, I remember I worked at UPS in college unloading trucks. And I was, at the time, I was like 19 and 20 years old. I could eat whatever I wanted, and I never gained a pound. It was glorious. I wish I could go back to that. And I remember leaving UPS, me and another guy that worked there, and it was kind of physical labor. And we would stop at Walmart on the way back to college. It would be 2:30 in the morning. And I would buy, it was during the winter months, and I would buy a quart of eggnog. And before I got back to college, I would have drank the entire quart of eggnog. Oh, to be able to do that again. Those were good times. But we just live in a different society where we kind of live in a 24-hour-a-day society where we literally burn the candle at both ends. And I think that's a dangerous thing. Too many days that you have like that, and your candle's going to burn out and you're going to burn out. We're not made to operate that way. God didn't create us that way. Someone wrote that many people are slowly succumbing to the strain of life because they have forgotten how to rest. Rest is not to be a sedative for the sick, but rest is a tonic for the strong. It saves us from becoming slaves even of good works. You can be a slave to good things, but you've heard the phrase before, good is the enemy of best. I mean, so you want to be careful that you're guarding yourself from becoming too busy. In the book, Mastering Life, Rob Morgan makes this point, and I thought it was a great point. He says there's a key difference between Christians and everyone else. Most of the world works hard so they can enjoy their leisure. Christians instead enjoy their leisure so they can work hard. They rest so they can produce. They rest so they can labor. And it's a totally different perspective on life. If I'm looking at my rest and rejuvenation as an opportunity so that I can serve better later and so that I can work harder later and so that I can be more available later, then it's a different perspective on life. Jesus understood this in his earthly ministry. Now, I'm going to go through these kind of quickly, but and by the way, when you go through the Gospels, so some of these verses were listed in the reading, but I also read through some of the Gospels and I just kind of tried to underline almost every chapter that records Jesus' earthly ministry. Somewhere in the chapter, Jesus, the Bible says, gets away and rests. I mean, almost, you read it. You read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When Jesus is serving and ministering, he's also resting. And some of these passages make note of that. It says, then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness. And so he gets away. He's by himself. He's resting. Look how long. 40 days and 40 nights. He gets away. My brother is an elder at like a Lutheran church, and he was talking about the equivalent. They have the equivalent of what a pastor would be, and he said our pastor is about to go on a sabbatical. And I said, really? I said, that's interesting. He said, yeah, they go every 7 years. I said, well, how long? He said, 6 months. I said, if I left 6 months, they wouldn't let me come back. I wouldn't want to do that. That sounds like a bad idea. But Jesus got away for 40 days and 40 nights to rest and rejuvenate. In Mark chapter 1, it says, and in the morning, rising up a great while before day, he went out, the Bible says. He departed into a solitary place, and there he prayed. And Simon and they that were with him followed after him, and when they had found him, they said unto him, Lord, everybody's been looking for you. And several times you'll find that where it's like Jesus slips away. He doesn't tell anybody. Nobody knows where he is, and I think that's on purpose. He doesn't want anybody to know where he is because he's resting and he's rejuvenating. And Luke chapter 4, and when it was day, he departed and went into a desert place or an away place. And again, the Bible says people were looking for him. They were seeking him. Where's the Lord? Well, he was resting. He was rejuvenating. He knew he had to do that. In Luke chapter 6, and it came to pass in those days that he went out into a mountain to pray, and he continued there in that place all night in prayer to God. Matthew 14, when Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into an away place and apart and away from everybody to rest. Mark chapter 3, verse 7, but Jesus withdrew himself with his disciples to the sea. John chapter 12, these things spake Jesus and departed, and he did hide himself. Jesus was like the hide and seek champion. If you can tell by reading some of these verses, he knew how to get away and he knew how to hide. John chapter 11, Jesus therefore walked no more openly among the Jews, but went thence unto a country near to the wilderness. Jesus as the sinless Son of God and God robed in flesh, if he saw it necessary for him to get away and to rest and rejuvenate, and if he needed that as often as he needed that, you and I need to do that too. We need to make sure we are always avoiding the trap of busyness. This was another quote that I saw in the book that really stood out to me. Because my nature, and the people that work with me would admit to this. My nature is I feel like I always want to be available. If anybody calls me, I want to be available. If anybody says, I want to meet you, with you, I want to be available. If anybody knocks on my door in my office, I want to be available. I just want to be available all the time. But he points out in the book, if you're always available, you're never really available. Nobody's ever really getting the full you if you're always giving your full self to everybody. And so you have to set aside times where you're resting and rejuvenating and then pouring yourself into the opportunities that God gives you. And we'll talk more about that in the last principle. So principle number 2. Principle number 1, avoid the trap of busyness. Principle number 2 is allow for times of restfulness. Allow for times of restfulness. Build into your schedule times to rest. And be intentional about that. Anybody recognize what this is? Anybody know what that is? Does that look familiar to anybody? Man, y'all are like not seek. Thank you, Ronnie. I appreciate you. These other people that were mumbling it, they're just resting. So this is a rest area. And I found out something about rest areas I didn't know. Now, where I'm from in Oklahoma, there tends, to me at least from around here, there's way more rest areas because there's all these turnpikes and toll roads and long interstates where there's not a lot of exits. And so you have a lot more rest areas. than here. But this would look familiar to you because many of you have seen this sign before. This is a rest area right when you come into the state of Tennessee. Well, something about rest areas that I did not know, but I found out is according to federal policy, about every half hour of driving or so, there must be a rest area to take a break. And if there's not, you know what happens? The state builds one. And they put one there. Why do they do that? Well, that 30-minute drive includes state-run stops, commercial truck stops, regular exits where there's somewhere to stop. But the placement of official rest stops is calculated against the existence of other non-state run opportunities to pull over. And the interstate system, they look at that, and if there's not somewhere for people to stop in less than a half-hour drive, then they build a rest. By the way, that's why the rest stop is right there at the state line, because that's a long stretch of highway where there's not many exits and not many places to stop. And so they put a rest stop there. The official purpose of a rest area is for safety and convenience, as stipulated in the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which created the National Interstate System as we know it today. And in that act, it recognized that in some rural parts of the interstate, opportunities to exit the highway would be few and far between. And since drivers would become tired and would need the opportunity to rest and rejuvenate, they began to build in 1956, and most were built from 1956 to 1976, they built rest areas every half hour. And they calculated that a person may need to stop now my dad didn't believe in that rule. Now, he stopped about every 10 hours. I mean, it was ridiculous. But they figured that people would need the opportunity to stop, rest, use the restroom, get a snack every half hour or so. And if the U.S. interstate system understands that you and I at times need to get out and stretch our legs, we need to be in nature, we need to take a break. In life, we need to take a break sometimes. It needs to be for the interstate system, it's every 30 minutes. It's interesting if you read some studies from China, like the workforce in China. Most of the people that work in an office in China, as a part of their day, it's built into their schedule of their day, they take a nap. Now, I could get along with that. I could go along with that. But I was looking online. I should have brought a video, but there was these people sitting at a desk in China, and they hit a button on their chair, and it just lays down like a lawn chair. And they just get a pillow, and they go to sleep for 45 minutes. And they talk about how they're much more productive because of they're rested. And that, some of you guys that work about 2 o'clock, you kind of start to crash. And these people don't do that because they've had an hour nap. They feel pretty good. And but one thing that I saw that Robert Murray M'Cheyne said, now you may not know who that is, but he was a famous Scottish pastor. He's a preacher that's often quoted. He has some great quotes from some of his writings. But he died at the age of 29. And he died because he had a weakened immune system from overwork, excessive busyness, and chronic fatigue. His immune system collapsed and he died at 29 years old. And as he neared his death, this is what he said: "The Lord gave me a horse to ride and a message to deliver. Alas, I've killed the horse, and I can't deliver the message." See, the Lord's given all of us a message to deliver, but the problem for a lot of us is we're killing the horse. I went the whole pandemic nearly, and I did not get COVID. My wife got COVID. Many of you remember that. Brother Bob certainly remembers that because he had to preach on Easter Sunday because of it. My wife got COVID the day before Easter that week. My kids got COVID. I never got it that whole time. I did not get it. And my wife, I remember, you're going to think I'm crazy for this, but we live in a very small house. And she's like, "Are you going to sleep in here?" I'm like, "Listen, all of y'all have COVID. I'm in this house with y'all. If I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it. I'd rather get it in the bed than on the couch." So yeah, I'm going to sleep in here. I don't care. I mean, I'm more comfortable in the bed. I'm not sleeping on the couch. And she said, "You're going to sleep in here knowing I got COVID?" I said, "Yeah, I really don't care." But I didn't get it. I slept right there. I was in the house. My kids, they waller all over you and snot all over you. And I just thought, well, I just kind of resolved I'm probably going to get it. I didn't. I was in the COVID unit multiple times. I mean, I was around it a ton of times. I never got it until December of 2021. And I went to, we had been very busy here at the church. We've been very, very busy. And we had this Christmas stuff going on, and I had some stuff going on in the evenings, and we were getting Christmas ready for our kids, and I was up real late Christmas Eve night because we had a Christmas Eve service here, and then after that I had to go home and help Santa put all the gifts together for Christmas Day, and I was up till like 2 or 3 in the morning, And then we had Christmas with our kids. And then after we had Christmas with our kids, we got in our car and we drove to Oklahoma overnight. And so I did not sleep but a couple hours Christmas Eve night. Then the next night I didn't sleep at all. I get to Oklahoma, and then my dad had something for us to do the next day, like at 7 a.m. And so I slept a few hours, and I got up, and we did that. I was there a day or two, and then we drove overnight back. So like out of 4 or 5 nights, there was 2 or 3 nights I really didn't hardly sleep at all. When I got back, I started feeling really sick, and I tested positive for COVID. Well, I went to see the doctor, and I said, how did I get COVID? I said, I've been all this time. I was sleeping in the bed with my wife who had COVID. And I wasn't around anybody that I knew that had COVID. I said, I don't know how I would have got it. I was in the car most of the time. And he asked me, he says, well, have you lacked any sleep? I said, well, it's funny that you should say that. He said, well, it's your immune system. And he said, man, when you get tired and your body, he said, your immune system has no ability to fight off anything like that. And that's just a small illustration of what he said. Many times we have something to do, but we can't do it because we're killing our horse and we're not taking care of ourselves. We're not resting like we should. We're not relaxing like we should. I think there's some practical helps that I can give you with this. First of all, it involves rest. It involves rest. It's interesting in Acts chapter 20. Acts chapter 20, Paul's addressing the Ephesian elders and he's given them some help. He says in verse 28, take heed therefore unto yourselves. And then he says, and to all the flock over the which the Holy Ghost has made you an overseer. If you notice the order of this, essentially what Paul says here, he says, take care of yourself and then take care of the flock. Not take care of the flock and then take care of yourself, because you can't take care of the flock unless you take care of yourself. You're going to kill your horse and you're not going to be able to take care of the flock. Everybody that's flown has heard this statement right here. In case of a cabin pressure emergency, put on your own mask first before assisting others. And the idea is you can't help another person until you can breathe yourself. You can't minister to another person until you've ministered to yourself. One of the principles we're going to talk about later in the book is encouraging yourself in the Lord. And the Bible refers to David encouraging himself in the Lord. And sometimes you have to rest and rejuvenate so that you can be a blessing to other people and you can take care of other people. And some of you may ask, what is rest? I mean, what is rest, the biblical definition of rest? I think this is a good definition of what rest is. It's not just sleep. Biblical rest is a state of mind and body that allows God to restore our souls and replenish our strength. And now look, I will tell you, we all need rest, but this rest is going to look different for different people. Some people rest and rejuvenate in different ways. I saw Scott would rest and rejuvenate. Fishing would be a restful and rejuvenating activity for him. For me, that would not be restful or rejuvenating. I would just be mad. I would not enjoy that. But he does, he enjoys that. Some people like to hunt, and that's restful and that's rejuvenating for them. That's not really restful or rejuvenating for me. I decided a while back I was going to try to do something, try to pick up some kind of hobby that would be would create some solitude and be restful for me, and something that I would enjoy, but that would also be physically good for me. And when I first moved here, we had kind of gotten to where I really like to hike. I'm not from the outdoors. I didn't live anywhere near the outdoors. And so this was kind of like an anomaly to me when I moved here. Like, wow, trees, trails, this is crazy. And so my wife teaches in 3rd grade. And so our day off here at the church is Thursday. Typically, all of the pastoral staff is not here on Thursday. Miss Debbie's here. All of us use that day, and we're not here. And we're here every other day, but we're not here that day. And so used to, on Thursdays, I'd spend time with my wife. Maylee was not in school. I'd spend time with Maylee. Well, this is her first year of school. My wife is teaching. So Thursdays is pretty much a party day for me. No, it's not a party day. But my family's all doing something else. And so I thought, I'm gonna get into something that would be restful and rejuvenating. And I'm gonna hike. This is about 3 weeks ago. And so this Thursday, I got up, I did the things I needed to do that morning. I took care of some things. And about 11 o'clock, I went to the fire tower trail, the pinnacle. And I was going to do it. I've done it before, not by myself. I'd done it with other people. But when I got there, it was a little bizarre because there was nobody there. And that was odd to me because any other time I'd been there was always people there. And so anyways, but I just started. I said, I'm just going to do it. And so I get out of the car, I get my backpack, and I start up the Pinnacle Trail. I get to the top, I read. It was glorious. I got to the top of the fire tower. I was reading. I was enjoying it. The cool breeze. I was exhausted when I got up there because I'm out of shape. So the breeze was feeling really good. And I got back down, and I started to come down the fire tower, and I got a ping on my phone, and ping, and it said, rain is going to begin at 3:12. And I just realized when it did that, I never looked at the weather. And now I know why nobody's here. And so I thought, well, maybe it'll be light. Some of y'all remember this Thursday because it was the most severe storm that I think I have seen since I've lived in Unicoi County. And I was walking down the trail and I could hear like a freight train through the woods, this storm coming. I could hear the trees crackling. I mean, I could literally, this is no lie. I could literally hear trees falling. There's a question, if a tree falls in the woods, you can hear it. They fall and you can hear it. And I'm walking down the trail and it starts hailing. It's hailing and pouring rain. And I pulled my hood over and I thought, this is why I don't try to rejuvenate right here. This is why I don't do this. And I don't know if it was raining so hard that the trail became completely muddy. And of course, the entire 4 miles is downhill on the way. And so it's a muddy, downhill, hailing. And it was miserable. I mean, it felt like it took me 5 hours because it was just so miserable. And shocking, I never saw anybody. I was the only one on the trail. But I tell you that to say that kind of as a joke, but we all need to find something that we can do that brings us rest and rejuvenation. Maybe it's spend time with your kids or your grandkids. Maybe it's reading. Some people like to sit on the beach and read a book, or some people like to go somewhere and drink coffee and read, and that rejuvenates them. I mean, for everybody, it's something different. But listen, God himself rested on the seventh day. Now, you got to understand, God didn't rest on the seventh day because he was wore out. God didn't rest on the seventh day because he was so fatigued. And it's not like God even really needed a restoration of strength, or that necessarily God even needed to be rejuvenated. Yet he rested. So why? Why did he do that? I think there's a couple of reasons. One reason is that rest for him was enjoying the intervals between tasks completed and work to come. It was an interval where I accomplished this, I'm going to rest, and then I'm going to move on to the next thing. Of course, the other reason is because it's a pattern for us to follow, a restful pattern that we need regular rhythms of rest. Exodus 33, God said, and he said, my presence shall go with thee, and I will give you rest. Exodus 34, 6 days shalt thou work, but on the seventh day thou shalt rest. In earing time and in harvest thou shalt rest. It's a command for God's people to rest. Numbers chapter 10, and they departed from the mount of the Lord 3 days' journey, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them in 3 days' journey to search out a resting place. They were looking, we got to find somewhere to rest and rejuvenate. Matthew 11, 29, Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart. And he says, and you shall find rest. You're going to find rest unto your souls. So practical tip is it involves rest. I would also say it involves renewal. It involves renewal. I like what 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16 says. It says, the Apostle Paul writes this, therefore we do not lose heart. He says, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. He said every day we're being renewed and refreshed. Now our body is wasting away.